Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I am director of Eurasia here in Brazil, and unfortunately, like Christopher Gardner told us, this session with the secretary was canceled due to appointments that the secretary had, and it was about tax policies in Brasilia. And in his name, we apologize for this change in schedule. But we have prepared a very important session to discuss the scenario in Brazil when it comes to reformations and what is to come. So I welcome José Pereira, president of the Safra Bank. And we also welcome Fernando Meira, partner and manager of Pinheira Advogados, two important figures. I would like to thank the partnership and the friendship, as well as the sponsorships of this event, which allowed us this opportunity. And a special guest, Almeida, as ex-secretary of finances. So now Jose Olimpio will take the word. Hello to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here on this event with Eurasia to debate very important topics. I'm super happy to be here with Masuero, that has a record to serve Brazil, and because of that, the Brazilian person has each and every reason to thank him for what he has done to the country. Masuero, you were a part of the administration of finances. And I think it's important for the audience to have a perspective of how this administration is going in regards to economic politics and envisioning a future for Brazil. Good afternoon. And first and foremost, thank you to Eurasia, the biggest political consultory in the world. It is an honor to be within you all. In relation to the economic politics and about foreign governments, I think Brazil is lucky because the last few years have been very difficult for Brazil. There was an impeachment procedure, and there was also a second impeachment without a political base, and Brazil has approved very important reforms: pension reform, central bank independence, labor reform, and changes in regulatory work. And with that, the economy is moving up. 4 years ago, we economists had the projection wrong. Back a few years, we expected the GDP to reduce by 6%, but it only reduced by 3%. In 2021, we expected it to grow 2.5%, but it grew 5%. Last year, we expected it around a zero, but it grew by 3%. This year, we expected a 0.8, 0.9 growth, but thanks to good crops, it grew 2%. No one knows why economists are getting the data wrong, but these reforms in the last 5, 6 years has increased Brazil's potential. This is a possibility. Brazil started off with a few mixed messages. Within the first week of government, we heard a minister saying that the pension reform would be revised, and then another minister telling that the labor reform would be revised. And then the chief of staff told us that all of these opinions were speculation, and while their bills don't go through the civil cabinet and the presidential palace, they will not be executed. And the financial minister was a candidate to government. This minister, along 6 months of his term of office, he has been trying to get the message across, pushing for a tax reform, which was, and the major topic of this panel is that it has been 30 years that Brazil discusses pension reform. Our tax system is very confusing, very complex. It is ever changing, and Brazil's tax burden is super high, equal to England and equivalent to 34% of the GDP. We have two challenges. Is that tax burden going to be reduced? No. But the challenge is to at least enhance the tax system. So the government is pushing that, negotiating with the governors, and the governors want to transfer at least 75,000 reais a year to the regional government. And in some point, they will meet halfway with the government to alleviate the debts along with the IRS. When it comes to construction work, healthcare, and education, so things are moving forward, and it's very positive. And possibly the time has come in which we can move forward. Like the pension reform, we spent 3 years discussing it in a government without a political basis, and we were able to approve the pension reform without any opposition. So I think this government, after some time of confusion, we are moving forward, and we were very well surprised today because the report of the National Bank regarding inflation was released, and they said that according to the interest rate of Brazil, um, uh, the inflation is reaching its goals. So the National Bank will start cutting interest rate in August, and things will start to look up. Finishing in June, in 12 months, Brazil has the biggest real interest rate in the world. It's kind of hard to explain. It's interesting that you should point it out. Why does Brazil need such a big rate, nominal and real, to hold inflation? It has always existed. Back then, we had two rates, one of the BNDES and another from the National Bank, Central Bank. But today we have PLT, so there is no more subsidies when it comes to BNDES. And even then, we need a real rate of 8 or 9%. And if you look at these rates, they are between 5 and 6%. They are real rates that is not seen anywhere in the world. Why does Brazil still need such a high threshold to counteract inflation? I don't know if I have a good answer for that, but what is happening is very surprising. For example, we are experiencing a period of decreasing inflation. Of course, that is helped by commodities. We started this year with a much bigger petroleum price, and we are finishing the year with a petroleum barrel going at $170, without an impact in retail prices, which is very positive. And the rates in Brazil are a little bit above 8%. And today, this unemployment rate by the national census is around 8%, 8.4, and we're talking about a country in which the unemployment rate has been 6% in the past 6 years. And in 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 was above 10%. Now it has reduced. We have an unemployment that is expressive within a context in which the job market is not that bad. And in services, when we take the prices out of food and energy, the average has been falling, which is very positive. We have been discussing that in general, when the central bank increases interests and reduces the economy, that makes it better, and the inflation reduces in 10 to 12 months, and maybe a change is coming. the interests in Brazil is very high. The central bank calculates that even in the past years, approximately 40% of the credit in Brazil is directioned, and we have a chance to recover, like a rural credit or other direction credits. Yes, because the subsidy is approximately 15 billion, but I think in the last 6 years there has been a major change in Brazil. If you talk about, if you talk with infrastructure companies and ask them about financing in 2014 or 15, the answer will be 70% of funds come from public banks and 25% from self-investment. But that has changed. In the last few years, the market of capitals has grown. When we look about new capital, follow on real estate fund, LCE, LCA, CRI, CRA, and incentives, all of that amounted to 100 B in 2016 and 2021 in 610 billion. And last year, 540 billion. We came from raising 100 billion to raising 600 billion, and that is very important. And the Brazilian economy has become more sensitive to interest rates. I don't know exactly why we have to work with such high interest rates, but there are good things happening. 20 years back, when we had to use interest rates to lower them, there was a 20% or 25% rate each year, and now they are so much bigger and will start dropping in August. By the end of the year, we will finish with a nominal tax that is much bigger. Perfect, Fernando. Everyone is always very optimistic while listening to our speaker, and we do really feel that Brazil has gotten much better in many fronts. Talking to foreign investors, I have a good thermometer, and we feel that from a time back, the interest has been dropping and it hasn't returned. And talking to investors, one of the recurring themes is a lack of legal security. In the first semester, we discussed revisiting the sanitation situation, as well as attacking the central bank and discussing the awareness of people in a public administration of the necessity of bringing more legal security and therefore enhancing the workplace with more stability. Fernando, this is a difficult question, but well, look. I think that legal insecurity in Brazil has been much worse. We are talking about a country that basically 30 years ago has boycotted the public debt. Just to remind ourselves, we told the federal government that we weren't going to assume the debt. And 6 months from now, I will decide the future of this money that is stuck in the bank. Recently, another of our boycotts was the precatory. You go into court and you are entitled to receive from the government, you are entitled to it, but now the government has a cap. And all of this involves legal security. When we look at the world today, legal security in many countries, such as America, for example, and the Supreme Court, legal security is a recurring theme. In England, the same debate also exists. In Brazil, legal security is a problem, and everyone is aware of this. The point is what is going to be made moving forward. Brazil is one of the top 5 countries with a biggest external debt. After the pandemic, it amounted to $46 billion. Last year, it was 90 billion, and this year, around 80 billion. The important thing that is that in some areas, Brazil is so competitive that regardless of legal security, the investors are coming. For example, tomorrow a auction will be held and forums will be present. And maybe next year there will be 2 more auctions. All foreign investors want to participate in these auctions. Today, all of oil companies, by stakeholder pressure, are not investing in fossil fuels anymore and are investing in renewable energy. The country in which many oil companies are looking for those investments is Brazil. So, in many sectors, not just agriculture, Brazil is so competitive that it attracts these foreign investors, which I think it's important to mention that when these investors come to Brazil, they don't compare Brazil to the United States with German, but China, Turkey, Russia, Mexico, and these countries don't have that much legal security. So when we look at Brazil's trajectory, does it have a risk of general strike? No. The most important aid is Bolsa Familia, which will be a program that is worth billions this year. The job market is good, and the inflation is decreasing, especially within foods, having an all-time high since 5 years, going at 0.5% last year, no, or this year. So there is an upturn in margin, and I think the investors were very scared, and they wanted to change the sanitation decree. In the ministry, there probably won't be a change in sanitation, but when we look at the ministry, there probably won't be a change in concessions in highway. I was in the Ministry of Transportation last week, and Brazil has made 2 or 3 concessions at most in the highways. And in the last semester, there will be more concessions, but the interest will have to reduce in order to make that investment in highways. So little by little, the government is stepping up. And when we look at a broader frame of time, the security of the Brazilian banks are really strong. We are in a scenario in which debts have gone up. Maybe they will go down. And when it comes to rates, the scenario is different. The government has presented a tax plan, and within 3 years from now, we will still be discussing tax adjustment. But the government's plan has a benefit. The minister has said that from now on, the real spendings, the real public spendings will be between 0.6 and 2.5 a year. But for it to go 2.5, the revenue will have to grow 2.5 a year. And we can still think, wow, that is such a big growth. But in 97, all throughout 2015, the average public spending of Brazil was 6% a year. So moving from 6% as the public spending average to 2% is an advancement. So all in all, let's discuss legal security by discussing with the minister we will understand that there is a concern to reduce the legal risks, but it's not specific to Brazil. It was present in New York too. And when it comes to investment, and if the public accounts are okay, in which country would it be good to invest? Maybe Russia. Imagine that. So let's contextualize. In the emerging world, I was in New York some time ago, and the thing I listened to the most from investors was a big interest in Brazil and in Mexico. So our time is up, but it's been so good that I will allow myself a last question. I think the tax reform is on its way, and it has a good chance of being approved. And according to the Senate, but there's still we need to talk about the administrative question. In your administration, it was widely debated, and it was a resource, a very efficient resource. How do you see this moving forward? And does it have any chance of it being discussed in this next administration? Yes, I think we would need to change the narrative. I think the administrative reform was sold as a way to quickly reduce the expenses, public expenses. And I think the focus is not that. I think that it should be a result of a very well administrative reform, and we can differentiate to augment the efficiency of the democracy. Yes, because with time, that employee will climb the corporate ladder regardless of performance. When I was a secretary of financial, when I was 35 years old, I was already at the end of my career. It's very rare to encourage a man with 35 years that has reached the end of their career. And so the administrative reform will make the government save money. And do you see a chance of it being resumed? It depends. It has to be sold in another form, even for the public sector, not be antagonized as much. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was excellent. And now we will move on to the next session.